Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back quickly from morning tea. I'm going to introduce Laura, and I'm going to make it quick because all of the bios are available to you in the program, and if not, on the World Wide Web. Laura is a designer, adjunct professor, and managing director at the Stanford D School. She specialises in professional education and strategic partnerships. On a personal note, I've now known Laura for maybe 5 or 6 years. She is one of the most generous educators that I've come across. Her work and her ideas are exciting, startling, sometimes overwhelming. And I'm hoping that you'll have all of those experiences today. So please welcome Laura McBain.
Thank you all.
On the mic.
In true educator fashion, I just can't stand behind a mic. I just can't. I'm too ADHD, I guess. I'm just wanting to move. So Michael and I, and this is true our relationship. We were sitting there during the break time and we're like, I have a deck. We can get started. But I was like, should we just play a game to start? And I was like, I think we might. I think we should just do that first. I know I have some stuff to share, but I was like, what if we just do something first? Okay, Robin's with me. Okay, so we're gonna play a game. I'm gonna have to put the microphone down, but I will use my teacher voice, okay, to explain it. So this game is called, Fail Test. Play it?
Yes, you do.
Yes. So the game is really simple. I want you to stand up, find a partner, someone next to you. In our early years, we called our elbow partner, someone next to you. Michael is going to demo, and wait for me. He did not know last night that he was doing this. He didn't know about an hour ago we were going to do this. And so he has graciously volunteered. He just learned what the game is, so we'll just see how this goes.
I'm a specialist in failure, so you're in safe hands.
Okay, fail test. And you have to count to 3. It looks like this. 1,
2,
3. 1,
2,
3.
1,
2.
3.
That's it. So you're going to go counting 1, 2, 3, back and forth. Wait for your partner as fast as you can. Go. Okay, you all were great. Okay. How did that go? Good? Easy? A little bit. Okay. So you all are very smart. We're at the University of Sydney, right? So you're very smart people. I'm going to change the game slightly. Okay. So you're going to keep counting, but every single time you say 1, you're going to replace the 1 with a clap. It looks like this. You ready?
2, 3.
Not like that. Let's try it again. Not like that. Try one more time. 1,
2,
3, 2.
3.
Okay, something like that. Marcus, go. That was good.
Because I was just repeating. Yeah.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Have you played this one before? Have you played this before?
No, it's good though.
Yeah.
It's great. I love its simplicity.
Everyone's and people go oh, I can't do it. Okay, hold up. Okay. We're not done yet. I'm gonna make it a little bit more complicated because y'all are so smart. Okay, you're gonna keep the clap, but you're gonna place the 2 with a snap. I know, it gets real hard. So it looks like this. Ready? 3.
3.
Okay, go. Fast as you can.
At the end of it?
No, one more.
All right.
Wait, one more. We're gonna do a little thing. So at the end, we're gonna do the 3 and you put 3 with the phone. But this time, anytime they make a massive mistake, they don't get it right, they have to do what we call a massive to that Circus Soleil. You have to be oh, really express the failure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, one more round. You're not done yet. Okay. This part gets even more complicated. I also love when people like, I'm just clapping, and then they're like, oh, am I clapping? It's like, wait, like, I don't remember how to clap anymore. So you're gonna keep the snap and a clap, but the three, you're gonna replace with a stomp. Now hold up. This is what I would love you to do. Every single time you make a mistake, okay? Has anyone ever seen, we're gonna do something. Has anyone ever been to like a Cirque du Soleil show? Yeah. And Cirque du Soleil shows, they're like on those, right? Those wires, and they're doing those amazing chord things and things like that. And sometimes they make mistakes. But what do you think they do when they make the mistake? High five. They do a massive ta-da. They make it part of their act, right? And so every single time you make a mistake, I want to see the most outrageous, creative, ta-da, embracing that failure. On your mark, get set, go.
Good.
Yeah, I'm good. Well,
Done
you have to
with
say
me?
thank you. Yeah. What's that? Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3. I love it. So thank you, partner. Give him a thank you. Let's thank Michael for jumping in and volunteering himself for part of this. Really quickly, before we get into this kind of this chat this morning, this is so loud. How did that feel, by the way? Fun. Did it feel like hard at all? A little bit, yeah. Was anyone frustrated sometimes? You're like, oh, I can't do the thing. I don't know how to snap anymore, right? So I wanted us to play, this is a game called Ta-da, our fail test. It's one of our Stokes at the D School, where we start activities to help stoke or pull out a mindset, if you will, that we want to cultivate when we're teaching. Right, so if we're trying to cultivate embracing failure or embracing imperfection, we might play a game like this. So it's like, oh yeah, I know what that feels like. Let's get groovy with it. Let's have some fun so we can lower the expectation around perfection. And so I wanted to start with that because I think it's kind of fun. And also like it gets us reminding about this question of sometimes when we're doing creativity work, there's this whole thing about like a convergent thinking and divergent thinking. Right? Converging is like making sure ideas come together, and then divergent thinking are things that are like really broad and you're brainstorming. And the reason why I wanted to start with this game is that sometimes when we're doing convergent versus divergent thinking, there's all these beautiful images of like how fun it is, right? But I'm going to give you some insights today. I'm calling this title or this presentation Confessions. Practicing divergence, confessions from a design leader. And the headline here is that like, I didn't know I was creative until a couple years ago. And so I work at the D School, and we spend a lot of time in imagination, human ingenuity, and it's so much about embracing creativity, embracing divergent thought, bringing people together to make stuff happen. But I want to start just a little bit about who I am, because he did this beautiful bio. Some of it may be true, some of it might not be true. We don't know. We'll find out. It's on the internet. Nobody knows anymore what's true. And so I'll start with me. This is my actual 8th grade yearbook photo. This is 1980s US, by the way. So like there's a turtleneck here. Those are bangs. I do not do bangs well. And when I look at this photo and we're talking about, it's kind of sort of weird that I'm here talking about creativity, because when I think about this kid, I never thought I was creative. So in 8th grade and 7th grade in the United States, we take all these like home ec applied arts classes, right? I didn't do well. In the sewing class, they asked us to make these balloons, like round balloons. I wanted to make mine square. So I got a C on that. I didn't do well because it was like balloons are supposed to be round. And I was like, but can't they be square? Why can't I have them square? I tried out for the play. didn't get in. I'm still bitter about it, Michael. Still didn't get in. And in my art class, I would be drawing things, and you'll see in a minute some of my sketches. My parents were like, maybe you should be like a doctor or a serial killer, because your writing is not the type of writing you would think for an artist. And so, as a young person, I didn't think I was creative in the normal sense of what most people think about creativity in the arts and drama. I like things, but when I think back now as an adult, there was many moments that I was expressing creativity. I just didn't know I was. So like same years, my parents, we had this old like new computer. It was one of those like Commodore 64s. Y'all remember those? Yep. And during like the weekends and sometimes I would write stories by myself for no reason. Just because I liked writing stories and I was like writing random stories about something I'm making up in my head. They weren't part of school. No one ever read them. But I thought it was always fun to just like sit and write stories. In algebra class, I had this like begging question. I was like, what is X? Why do I care about X? I don't really care about the answer to X. And isn't there a different way to solve it? Why does the answer have to be 2? You know, I was always like, wait, there could be another way around this. And then as I got older, you know, I was playing with different things. I was telling this to someone the other night when I was talking about kind of my career and things, is that I always started to think out of the box. I was one of those people like, what is answer? So on a test score, for example, anyone love tests here? Yeah, I was waiting for someone to raise their hand like, yes. I was always looking for like the answer F that's not on the page. Because I was like, well, I don't like any of these answers. Why can't I have a different answer? And so when I think about, you know, this concept of divergence or divergent thinking, I was doing all these things. But my idea of creativity was always about like, oh, it must be in the arts, must be applied. I must be creating beautiful things. But that's not what I was doing. I was thinking all these different ways. Now, when I think about creativity or divergent thinking, anyone try to lead change and bring crazy ideas to people? Yeah, how does that go? Yeah, not so good, is it? It's not so good. Because when you look at like creativity, I pulled these literally this morning. What do y'all notice about these photos here? What do y'all notice? They're what? Dichotomies. What else? Yeah, either or, this and that. The thing that I also love, and you can kind of see it way up in this one, there's like a rainbow. They're like, yay, it's rainbow thinking. And then everyone in this one is like, oh, we're having a good, this guy's like super smiling right here, right? He's got a huge grin on his face. Like she's like playing with this thing. These dudes I think are really funny, like the artist versus the scientist and things like that. But spoiler alert, like when we're thinking about creativity, often, and especially when we're leading it in change or in classrooms, it's not always easy. People don't like the divergent person. We think about it as a creativity, but actually, when we're actually being creative in with people, the person on the side that's like, I don't think we should do it that way, what happens to that person in a meeting? Oh, you guys know the answer. Someone tell me. They get shut down really quickly, right? And so as a creative person, I would say, we were talking about this earlier about being an educator, and she asked me when I fell into design, and I would say, like, I don't really think I really understood that I was a really divergent thinker almost until a couple years ago. I didn't realize that that was my superpower. That is why I became a designer. That's why I'm creative. Because traditional schooling, traditional forms of creativity often exclude that. They perceive that it's drama, arts, things like that. But we're actually, when we're teaching people to be creative, it exists in every domain, right? And we actually need a lot of divergent thinkers if we're going to solve big problems. And so part of this kind of talk I wanted to say, and it really feels like this, I know, when you're doing creativity, that's what it feels like when you're in a meeting with divergent thinkers. You're like, come on, right? I pulled that up this morning. I'm like, that really echoes what it feels like sometimes. So I wanted to talk about like part of what this feels like is in design, we call it the peak squig. And it looks like this. In design processes, there's no one right way to get there. You're kind of in this massive moment of spiral. And what it feels like is this, right? It's the part of the process where everything that you know, right, has changed. It challenges you. And there's both maximum possibility and maximum uncertainty or ambiguity. Divergent thinkers thrive in this moment. I thrive in ambiguity. I think that's, again, like one of the crazy things that I do, as Michael knows. Like, I'm like, what about this? What about this? Because we're living in these moments where we're trying to get to the solution and we need to sit in the peak squig. And so what I thought I'd do today is talk about this, right? In the hardest learning moments, right? In our hardest learning moments, it's divergence, not certainty, that moves us forward. That's counterintuitive, right? Because most folks want certainty, like we're doing X, Y, and Z. And that feels like it gives you a direction. But when we're actually doing new work, creative work, it is the divergent ideas that actually propel us to something we didn't know existed before. And so I'm going to do something very different. I was telling Rachel last night, we're out, I said, I've never done this keynote before. This is a prototype, full stop. And I'm going to do it in a different way. I was telling someone in the back, like, my keynote is not a traditional research keynote. And I was telling Michael, this is going to look different than what you all just saw. So are you with me? All right, thank you. I didn't hear that quite well. Are you with me? All right, thank you. So I'm going to do something, and I retitled my title of this keynote to really be this, which is Creative Lessons I Learned the Hard Way. And so I'm going to tell you some stories because I think we learn through stories, right? We learn through people's stories. I think all of us learn that way. And so I'm going to tell you some stories about my design journey in the hopes that some of my insights could help you embrace your divergence. And so we're going to do it this way. For those of you who got to hang with me this last week, I did some workshops. We call this a journey map. And I use this in my classes all the time to do a couple things. I want to map what we learned and how I felt about it. So you're going to see different versions of this journey map. And headline, for those who like resources, you're going to see a bunch of QR codes on these slides. I'm a big practitioner, so all the QR slides are links to resources you can use. So just so you know, every time you see them, you can grab it. There's stuff you can take and do. But I'll tell you how this journey map works, and then we'll get into it. So on one scale, you're going to see two different lines. You'll see an emotional journey, that's a through line, and you'll see a dotted line, that's a learning journey. And on this side of the emotional scale, it's when I was like really feeling good. Like, this is great, I love this. And on the downside is like, I'm not feeling so great. And see, on this side, we're on the learning scale, you'll see moments where I was really feeling like I was learning a lot, right? I'm really learning. And in the bottom, not so much, okay? So I'm gonna share a couple different moments. And so what I did literally this week in my hotel room is I mapped my design journey for you. So this is a prototype. I've never shown it to anyone. So you're the very first group that sees that. And so it is a prototype. And so this is what I mapped. And you'll see it down here. And I mapped what I call as my first year of teaching. This is hard. How many people are going into teaching very soon? I know a few of you. I see a few of you here. How many people remember their first year of teaching? Keeping your hands up, was that challenging? Oh yeah, good luck. And I remember my first year of teaching, I was a teacher in San Diego, and I started my career in Southern California at the border of San Diego, Mexico. I was the 5th teacher my students had had that year. Started mid-year, and I taught 5 classes, and I was teaching high school, juniors, seniors, and freshmen. And so I walked in halfway through the year, and I had all these ideas about what I was going to do. I was like, all these method stuff, I had the lesson plans, and then I met the students. And as she's laughing, like, that did not go well, let's be honest. Like, I had all these assumptions about what was going to happen. And I remember halfway through the day, I literally shut the door, because in schools in the US, you have these classrooms pretty isolated. And I shut the door to my classroom, and I was by myself, and I put my head on my desk. And I literally started crying because in that moment, I was like, oh, snap. I don't think I can do this. Like, this is not what I signed up for. This was not one in my methods class. This was way harder than what I thought. And in that same moment, a young girl knocked on the door. Her name was Catherine, and she carried a trapper keeper. And she came in because she wanted to have lunch with me. For some reason, somehow, I have no idea what happened, she decided that having lunch with me was what she wanted to do. And in that moment, I had a completely different realization about what I was supposed to be doing. My job was not to teach content. My job was to listen to the voices that were not heard. As a divergent thinker, the best thing that we can do, just like Lynn earlier was talking about, is what's the voices that we haven't heard? That sparks an entirely new direction. She changed my directory. I don't think I'd be a teacher today, had she not come in. I wish I could tell you that she and I are like besties, she never came back, let's be honest, because I was still figuring my shit out. But anyway, it's part of that process. And so after a couple years, I became a tenured teacher, and I decided to leave and work and found a school called High Tech High, which is a project-based school. And so I decided to give up. I was teaching AP classes, traditional content, and then all of a sudden I was moving into project-based learning. Anyone know what project-based learning is? A bunch of you, yep. That's radically different, right, than teaching the content day to day. And so I remember feeling that first year, it felt like the first year of a teacher again. I was like, I can't do this. I have to make projects, and then I have to show them to people, and then we have to put them up in the school. And so it was hard, right? But again, in that lesson, part of the lesson of being a divergent in that moment is I learned this key thing. It's I have to make the work count. Right? This is a couple pictures of High Tech High. This is the early stages. It's an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary school, so art and science, art and math are together. This is a project from one of our very first exhibitions that I absolutely loved, where our students in 10th grade designed a World War II bunker. And all the students learned French, and you walk through a bunker, and they talked about all the things they learned during the World War II, and she was talking about the submarines. And again, in that year, I realized I had made all these projects, but they didn't matter to students. I was designing things, right? But they didn't really care about them. And I realized watching these students in that first exhibition, it didn't matter what I wanted. It had to matter to them. And I have an addendum to this, is why I think it's almost uber important, is we have to co-create with them, let them show the why. This is a physics project. For those of you who love art, it may look like an art project, but it is a kind of analog organ that talks about sound. And this was photographed in a school in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. Anyone who knows a little bit about the United States knows that the south side of Chicago is quite dangerous. This is a school that has 98% students of color, low income, many are first generation. And this is a school that basically in Chicago, students have to go through a metal detector to come in the door because they think the students are violent. And so we started doing project-based learning with them. And you'll see in this photo, what's fascinating to me every single time I look at it is that, again, the students decided they wanted to curate it. It wasn't the project that we thought they wanted to do. It was a project they wanted to do. They owned the walls. They turned every single wall into their work, right? I had to make the work matter to them, with them, and make sure that they actually were shaping that why, not because I did. So, a divergent thinker, I have to let go of what I think is true for me and think about what they really want. As a result, you can look this school up. It's called ChiTech. They do lots of projects now. And what's really interesting about this is that when they started doing these projects, students showed up. Sometimes students who didn't even do the project showed up because they wanted to help their friends. So when we start doing work, right, that matters to students, all of a sudden work goes up, quality goes up, but purpose goes up. So after a couple more years, and you're starting to see a trend here, I became a school leader. How many people are head school leaders in this room? A handful of you. Okay, love you. It's hard, right? And I was a middle school principal and a high school principal. And one of the very first things I remember when I first started was like, oh my gosh, I have to get these test scores up. And I was at a project-based school and I still felt like rigor. We have to get the rigor. And I got to make sure that I'm doing everything right. You know, I got to make sure that I've got the timetable correct, the teachers are right. I want to make sure that everything feels and looks secure. Because the idea of a school leader is to promote strength, right? Calmness and things like that. How do you think that went, do you think? Yeah, she's laughing like, not so good, right? Because sometimes as a school leader, the best thing that you can do is let go. This is a picture of Larry Rosenstock, who is the founder and CEO of High Tech High. He's now retired. MacArthur Genius Award winner. And literally, I can't tell you how many times Larry would come up to me and we're walking down the hall. And he's like, are we having fun yet? Are we having fun? And the single thing that he taught me as a leader is to say yes. When in doubt, say yes. And even better, say yes and. Even better, say yes and how can I help? Let go. I think sometimes we get so worked up about the test scores, all the kind of requirements. And in reality, the best thing as a divergent leader and creative leader is literally to let go. When we did that, and when I did that, people showed up. Teachers stepped up, students stepped up. They started doing things and making mistakes sometimes, right? And my job as a leader was not to punish them, but to hold them through those mistakes, right? When they failed, my job was to lift them through that, not punish them and let them think they were a failure. That's the job of a school leader, is to make place for this emergence, to make place for failure. Because if we're not doing that, we're probably not learning. And that was a huge shift for me as a leader, especially when we think about leadership and what it's supposed to look like. But knowing that actually letting go is the secret, allowing possibilities to open up, not from me, but from everybody else, I became a better leader. I became a more relaxed leader, right? A leader that can like let things happen and not try to control them. So you're starting to see a trend here. And then I became a designer. She was just asking me, I was in the class the other day, and she's like, how did you understand design? And so after a couple years of doing a school leader, I fell into design. I left High Tech High and started working at the Stanford Design School. And I will tell you, and you'll read right down here, it says designer, imposter syndrome. Because I wondered, I was like, am I a designer? I thought designers were like Steve Jobs with like the black turtleneck and the jeans, always had like funky jewelry on and like was listening to like German techno pop. I was like, that's not me. And so I remember, this is a true story. These are confessions, y'all. Probably like a year in, I was having a meeting with my executive director and I said, I don't know much about design. And she looked at me and she's like, Laura, you're the head of the K-12 lab for the D school. I think you do. But I learned a lot about this question about the question. So in this process, we started taking on all these different type of K-12 projects. We had to take on like different intractable problems. And one of the things that we looked at was like, how do we think differently about challenges or questions? How many people in this room have heard the statement, educators must prepare young people for the future that does not exist? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people have the answer to that? Raise your hand. A few of you, maybe a few of you, maybe a couple. I have heard that phrase, as you all, I don't know how many times, right? And every single time as an educator, I was like, how am I supposed to do that? That's like the most preposterous thing in the world, because I've been in education long enough for it to be surprised, right? I've been in education where students come back and they surprise you about the thing that they're doing because you could have never imagined A, that job, or B, that life. And so one of the things that I learned is really important as design is to like find my own process. Not do the process of the hexagons, not do the process of what someone else is, but like find my own way. Those of you have probably seen the design hexagons and things like that. We don't use that at the D school. Instead, we use design abilities, right? We riff, we have fun with these things. And so each of these feel like more like you're making music than you are making a thing, right? It feels way more nonlinear. And for me as a divergent thinker, it gave me the freedom to realize it's not just this thing and that thing and that thing and this step by step. It gave me the opportunity to lean into how I work. I feel very grateful to be at the D School because my divergence is valued, right? They're like, oh, that's crazy. Let's do that. Because I'm using and leaning into all these types of abilities. So the other thing we started doing, as I said, was like thinking about like design, like questions in K-12. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the problem we're trying to solve. And so I probably jumped forward a little bit, but the problem we were trying to figure out was this one. And as I said, this problem is one of those issues that I feel like we get the problem wrong. We ask the wrong question. And so we started working on this challenge in K-12, and we started spending time thinking about futures. And we put this question of what if, that's a powerful thing to say, is what if we actually forget the idea that we're removing or preparing young people for their lives as if we know how their lives are going to unfold, but instead give them the skills and agency to shape the world they want to build? That's a radically different question. And so as a divergent thinker, we have to question the question, question the premise, flip the entire question upside down and be like, oh, I think we're asking the wrong question. That for me was a huge lesson in insight. It's like, why do I have to answer the question that someone else gave me? Can I flip the question? And because of that question in this project, we actually created an entire compendium of K-12 resources at the intersection of futures, design, and equity that gave educators, school principals, ways to develop these things called empathy for the future. How do they trace change over time? How do you imagine possible jobs of the future? Right? How do you think about seeking visions of coexistence? All of these abilities that young people can start building today to imagine and shape a different world. That allowed us to unpack something radically different. If we had just stayed with, let's prepare young people, we might have stayed in the same spot, right? We would have focused on maths, maybe collaboration, but instead we landed at how do we build empathy for the future? It's a very different type of skill set, and it freed us up. And we're getting there, folks. 2 more. And so the next thing, then you'll see my journey here, is that one of the big things that we learned in all this design work is that finding bright spots. Sometimes when we're leaning into creativity work, we're trying to solve something that needs to be fixed. Right? We're like solving a challenge. We're like, we got to fix that. So we got to have a design sprint to like do this thing so that we can solve something. How many people have experienced something like that? Many of us, probably. And what we realized in this process, that it might be better to find the positive deviants. Positive deviants are divergent thinkers usually. They're countercultural. And so part of uncovering this lesson was like all of a sudden I was trying to solve something or fix something. But the challenge was like, what if I don't do that? What if I actually look for the people that are doing it well? How do we cultivate them? How do we understand them? How are the folks and the teachers that are doing things with the same set of students, but actually having amazing results? How do we do that? That led us to creating this positive deviance toolkit that educators and everyone can use to understand, unpack, and find the behaviors of a positive deviance in your school. And I'll give you one example. When we were uncovering this toolkit and starting to work on it, we taught a class with our students. And one of the things we tried to figure out was, in this particular challenge, we were trying to figure out how students in one school completed what we call the FAFSA, which is the Federal Student Loan Application. And in the United States, if you want any student loan, you have to fill this form out. So we looked at the data. And we're like, well, what is this data about? And we looked across the data set, and we looked at schools, similar demographics, similar structure, similar size. And we found one school that literally had like a 90% completion rate. And we're like, well, how is this possible? So we did empathy work. We went out, we observed, we talked to them, and we found out that the simple thing that they did was they told the students that the deadline was 2 weeks earlier. Yep. They told this like gentle white lie. It was countercultural, but as a result, they had 2 more weeks to get this done. And I say this as sometimes in design, we're trying to do challenges, but what if we actually flipped it and look for the bright spots? We can design for the peak points, not just the pain points. And so as I close up, gosh, I'm really good on time. That's great. Is now I serve as our managing director of the D School. And there is no way I could have anticipated the amount of crazy that we've had to deal with in the last 5 years. So for those of you down who can't see in the back, we all led during a global pandemic. Do you remember that? I became the managing director during the global pandemic. Same summer, we had massive fires in the Bay Area where literally we couldn't leave our house for like a month because of the smoke. Same time, we also had like massive racial reckoning in the United States where folks in George Floyd were killed. And I was leading my staff through that. People were exhausted. And also political turmoil, if we all want to talk about it, happy. But that was happening as well, right? All that was the context in which I was leading and designing. And on top of that, we thought it'd be a really great time, because everything else is up in the world, to redesign the D School. We inherited the undergrad and graduate master's program and design program, which meant we had to radically redesign the entire school. Now, if you've ever worked with designers, it's a lot of fun, but trying to design the design school with designers, not so fun. Everybody's got an opinion. Everyone wants to do something. And so that was my job. I wanted them to be exciting. We had to imagine what we're going to do for the next 20 years. I was trying to figure out, and I'm still figuring out, like what's next for design for the next 20 years. And so we started to create these kind of explorations. We realized in order for divergent thinkers to be known and seen and get to new ideas, we need to create convergent opportunities, convergent communities, where people to share their insights, rapidly prototype, so that the radical ideas don't just end with the cringe, right? But they end with experiments. And so we created a process literally like this, actually is the slide that I shared with my team, where we spent a year, probably even longer now, looking at explorations, thinking about the wildest processes we could do. We went to conferences. We did readings, we did lit reviews. We went out into the world. Like, should we be playing with like mushrooms, right? Should we be playing with psychedelic medicine? How are we playing with like near Earth orbit design? How are we thinking about futures? How are we thinking about making new materials that don't exist? How are we taking old sheep wool, making new fabric? We explored a lot and encouraged my team to go out and explore. But the biggest thing that I did is I started creating communities, having them think about, yes, you have the idea. Yes, it's great. But what's the point of view? What is the point of view of this idea? How does it actually align with the D School? Just because it's a great idea, we want to fit it into the culture. What does that look like? And then after we had a point of view, we started making experiments. Like, let's test these hunches. Let's give this a vehicle for these explorations to turn into experiments, to turn into investments. So create a structure where everyone, right, could bring their radical ideas, share hunches, share insights, and actually start prototyping to them so that we could actually get into something new. And then this right here, I literally did this last week with my staff. And we talked about artifacts. I had everyone bring an artifact of their work. And you'll see from the guidepost is that we had them think about like, what new ideas does it spark? And we had everyone at the D School doing this. And that means designers, students, finance, space, directors, everybody. I want to have innovation and radical thinking as equally as fun as how we pay people to how we play with psychedelic medicine. Both can be divergent ways of doing, right? They don't have to be a binary. And so we've been doing these types of things. And so I think when we're thinking about this concept of convergence and divergent thinking. All of us know divergent thinkers, you know, and some of us maybe, I know that we all have them. We're all kind of not either one sometimes. I think there's a misnomer of like one moment I'm doing convergent thinking and then the next moment I'm doing divergent thinking. I think the key for creating creativity is to create these convergent communities for people to bring disparate ideas together, to unpack them, because we're not just trying, right, to get the next thing. We're trying to get to momentum of something, trying to build something together. And so when you do that, when you start creating this momentum as a community, it takes the radical divergent like me, it gives me a structure to build with and feel seen and feel valued, right? That these crazy ideas have a place here. They're not just something that's on a whiteboard in some random room that no one's going to see, right? They're part of the learning process of being a designer and being a creative. And so for me, these are the 7 that I played with. They're probably wrong. One might be good, one might be bad, and there's probably 7 or 12 that's probably not up there, right? And so I share these with you as like when I think about this concept again of divergent thinking, sometimes we think it's about brainstorming, but in reality, they're practices you intentionally start doing, right? Looking for the invisible person, thinking about what's the thing that's really going to matter to somebody, not to me, but to them, right? How do I really lean in to like letting go, this emergence? There's something freeing in that when you're like, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen. And that's exciting, right? That's really important. And then, of course, this idea of these constellations, how do we come together? And so we're going to close with like a short activity. I want to ask you, you've all had a journey. Every single one of you have had your own learning journeys as educators, designers, creatives. What's a lesson you've learned in divergent thinking? What's something that you go to when you're trying to come up with a wild idea? What's a lesson, a practice, or an insight that you've had? Because the more we start like understanding how that works for ourselves, 1, we get to be intentional about it, and 2, we get to own it. I have this bracelet right here on my arm. It's called ownership. And as I said, like, I think 5 years ago, I don't think I considered myself a designer, even though I lead a design school. I didn't consider myself creative, but I own divergent thinking because it's my superpower. It's the thing that actually people want me to come and talk about and do because it's the thing we need in the world. So here's what I'd like you to do. Turn to your neighbor, someone next to your elbow partner. Maybe it's your, failed test partner. But I want you to think about like, what's one piece of your journey and like, what's one way that you practice divergent thinking? And you have about 1 minute or 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute per person. What's that? Yeah, I'm going to do one quote and then we're good. Okay, cool. All right. I would love to hear from folks. Anyone want to shout out a practice, an insight? Beck's got a microphone. Thank you so much, Beck. And then we might take some questions. But Beck's walking around with a microphone doing her best. Phil Donahue. Everyone remember Phil? Yeah. Anyone want to share out? Okay. Oh, we got one right here. Thank
I
you
want
so
to
much.
share.
Mic check. 1, 2,
Hello.
1, 2.
Mic check.
There you go.
Hi, I
for
was just
sevens, I
reflecting
think
on
just
something that my team was involved in planning an event that we have for schools in our network. And often the way we've approached it is kind of like a conference. but we were sitting around thinking, well, what if it was like a music festival? So we started
Yeah.
like
yeah.
coming in with a different metaphor, and we started riffing off
Yeah.
what we know about music festivals
Love
and
it.
different stages, and people could choose where they wanted to go and
Love it.
chill out areas and all that sort of thing. So we didn't go into psychedelics.
You never know.
That's my
Ah,
neighbor.
Not yet. Not
suggesting
yet.
that.
But I love that because often when we're thinking about an idea, we use a lot of analogs. So we'll often use analogs as a way to spark a new thing. And so we will think we intentionally design pictures of analogs. Like, is it like this? Is it like that? Sometimes we'll pepper the entire wall with analogs of an idea so that it can actually untap something. Right? That is what brainstorming looks like. It's not just the post-it on the wall. That doesn't, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. But the analog or looking at analogs is a radical way to shift your thinking about what's possible. I love that. Thank you so much. Let's take another one and then we'll hit it to questions. I think Michael told me that we're doing questions too, which I'm happy to do. One more. Oh, right down in front. Yeah.
We're taking questions,
Oh, we could do that too. I want to hear a lot more insight and then we'll go to questions.
insights.
One more insight. I know people, there we go.
Thank you so much for this presentation and the valuing of the divergent thinking and the feeling of feeling valued that I think sometimes is so difficult to achieve. I want to just share my experience. I developed a curriculum with visual artists, and working with visual artists, it was all about visualizing and breaking what are the normal diagrams that are triangles, circles, and really breaking out of those normal, convergent thinker kind of diagrams. And we adopted a metaphor. You mentioned a metaphor. So we went for an octopus.
Oh.
And so all our design process was guided by the octopus, where these tentacles were the different experiences and ideas. And then there was this central brain that was continuously nourished by the tentacles that were on the journey, meeting different elements in the context. So for me, two things spark this divergence. The visualization and the checking of our thinking towards the visualization, and the metaphor. So finding a metaphor that really opens up and allows space. So making space and different perspective, different tentacles.
Thank you so much. We're going to move to questions, but I think it's really important to start thinking about now, these are my lessons, right? You have your own. And I think as creatives, we should understand, we call this designing our design work, if you will, at the D School. It's one of our abilities. Understanding how you create space for these types of things. Like often in divergent thinking, you'll see images of like, oh, I'm just coming up with ideas and this magical thing. But the structures to unlock, because everyone can be a divergent thinker and a convergent thinker, right? We have the capacity to do both. Our brains can do that, but you have to create the structures and the conditions to unlock those, right? And that is what good teaching does, right? That's what good school PL does. And that's what like good learning is how do we flip all of those. Okay, we're gonna switch to questions and then we'll close out.
We've got time for 2 quick questions.
Great.
And I'm going to let Beck decide who they are.
Ouch. A lot of pressure, a lot of pressure.
Go.
Better be a good one. Yes.
Question away.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just had a question about, I guess, for teachers that are early in their career or pre-service teachers, because most of your ideas starting out would be contained to the classroom, how do you back yourself when you have these ideas to then, I guess, implement them in the classroom within this broader structure or context that you're operating in?
That's not a new teacher question. That's a teacher question.
So
That's a leader question.
that's a great question. I actually, I don't have the answer to this, but I will quote someone there's this interesting, if you haven't read, especially we have 2 earlier, I was in their classroom yesterday, so I got to spend time with them. And there's a lovely woman, Deborah Meyer, who wrote The Power of Their Ideas, mostly early years teacher. There's this question about now, I don't know how many school leaders in here again? Okay, maybe I'll get in trouble, maybe I won't, we'll find out. So Deborah, for many, many years, taught in Central Park East, which is a school in New York. And she had that question many times, like, what do you do in your classroom. Because if you want to do something crazy, you're going to get in trouble, right, for doing something. And you know what she said to us? She said, you know what? That's why you have a door, is you close the door. 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna tell you my secret, like school leaders, we're not walking around and looking in every single classroom all day. Yes, he's shaking. We're not. And so sometimes this is what a positive deviant does, is like, I'm going to do the things that I think are right for my students. And then I'm going to show you the results of them. I'm going to share them with you. If you seek permission, you won't be able to do it. And so she often would say, like, nobody knows what's going on in the classroom, so maybe you should just do what you want to do. And that's probably, I know it's true in the States, and my guess, looking at the for school leaders in this room, they're smiling, and that's probably true too. That is the thing that will probably get you in trouble, so don't quote me on that in the Zoom. But I do think that, like, we need more bravery in teaching. You know, if you're just doing the tick box, then your kids are just getting the tick box of what you're getting, right? And so, like, I think to be a creative leader, you need to be courageous, which means standing up for the things that make sense for your students and the context in which they're in.
And find allies and mentors.
Yeah.
Because there will, in every school, there is one.
That's right.
They're
And that's
sometimes hard to find, but they exist.
And that's why being in community is really helpful. Like, it's okay to spark these ideas, and school leaders have a responsibility to make that safe and create communities where those divergent ideas can come to life and experiment.
Okay, second question. Beck, you have the power.
Who's got hand? There was a question. over
hand
here.
here,
You've
hand-
got- Oh, there's like 4.
Oh, by the way, while we're getting to this second question, Laura has been indentured here now for
yeah.
a week and will remain here through the rest of the conference. So
Yeah.
if you have a question for her, please feel free to go up and ask her, because she will answer it. I've
here
done
all
that,
day.
and she did answer.
Here all day, here all week. Yeah.
Yeah, she's here all week.
Yeah.
Try the field. Okay, up the back.
Last question.
Oh, sorry, over there with the microphone.
Yeah, my question was very similar in terms of practical application. When the syllabus has changed to add far more content constantly, and when you spoke about, like, you've got to show them the results.
Yeah.
I loved when you were saying, like, empathy
Yeah.
is a really big one. Empathy doesn't have the quick results that you would if you're going to teach them
Yeah.
to the test.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you show them the benefit of getting these students to be more empathetic,
Yeah.
especially in this very divisive world?
So,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is curation in schools, as I showed you this one. This is, again, it's High Tech High, the school. One of the things that I really frustrates me when I go into schools is who owns the school, who owns the walls. Often we think that showing has to do with a test score. I'm a big fan of performance-based assessment or exhibitions or student-led conferences. If you go on that, where is it? If you go to that QR code, you'll see an entire toolkit called Share Your Learning, which is exhibitions, curation, and student-led conferences. That is how you do it. Because I will tell you, every single time I've worked with schools, the very first thing I ask schools, which is very scary for teachers, is we encourage them to host a public exhibition of learning. Has nothing to do with test scores. It's about what are you showing and building and making with your kids. And then students actually present. That is how you do it. Because what happens 9 times out of 10 is there'll be some students, no shade, but it's usually 9th grade or like, what is that, kids? Like, right? It's usually that grade that doesn't do the work typically. And what happens is all of a sudden you start creating what we call the peer effect. Someone does their work and then the next person does the work because the work matters to the world. And then you see empathy, you see creativity, you see students who all of a sudden didn't do any homework all semester, and they realize, oh, everyone's got something to show. And we're not talking about just artwork, right? We're talking about essays, we're talking about physics, we're talking about every domain that gets showed. Art teachers, I always have an amazing job. They know how to do exhibition and curation really well. But I think every teacher, whether you're teaching maths, English, science, has a responsibility to show that work. That is how you get people to do it. And my experience is like when you do that, the evidence is obvious because parents show up and then students start talking about the work that they did and what they learned and what they might do better. And that is transformative. When your work matters to the world, it changes the dynamic in schools. And so I always look at what's on the walls. Often if you go into a school and there's not much on the walls, there's probably not much happening. Let's be honest, right? So, any other questions?
No.
Okay. So I just want to end because I want to show the most important divergent. David Bowie. I want to close with this quote. It's one of my favorites. Any David Bowie
Hello,
fans?
I
in
have
here?
a question.
Yeah. I mean, I still love this quote because it speaks to my learning journey of the highs and the lows. Is like being creative, and this is the key, is like if you feel safe in the area you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Get a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting. My learning journey has been about that, as you probably saw, the up and down. Michael asked me yesterday, what am I going to do next? And I said, I don't know. But as we were talking about ideas, and I said, I don't know. And yet I was walking over this morning, I was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. It's a good question, Michael. But what I do know is that there's going to be some struggle with it. I'm going to have to learn, right? And it's going to be the same up and down that I'm going to have, a little spiral. But if I'm not doing that, I don't know if I'm really exercising my creativity, and I'm just not sure if I'm living, So thank you all.